In this video, I'm going to show you how to add some shape tweening to something that's already motion tweened, or after you've motion tweened something, you can kind of refine the movements using shape tweening in Adobe Animate. So the first thing I want to kind of show is that this leaf already, I created a little leaf that's just a simple design that is going along a motion path. And I've kind of refined the motion of it to a certain degree, but I'm going to kind of finish that up a little bit so that we can add a little bit better motion to it and get some rotation, and then add some motion tweening. So one thing that'll really help you out, and kind of one thing to realize, is if this path is a little too difficult to see, like right now it's in this sort of teal color, if you ever need to change that, you can actually go over here to the layer, and you can change the color. So right here is the color swatch. If you select that, it turns it into outlines. And if it's full, that it shows you, that's that layer that's motion tweened. Right now it's showing as an outline. There it's showing as a full. So if you double click this, double click that, you'll actually get the layer properties. And in the layer properties, you see the outline color. That also determines the path, the color of the path. So if you select that and you choose, say, a brighter color, then you can see the path a little bit easier, right? So you can kind of see that right there it's, click that. You can kind of see that it's a little bit easier to see, and that's where you get that color from, right there, right? So that makes it a little bit easier to see in here. So that helps you to kind of adjust your timing if you need to do it directly from the path. So the first step that I'm going to do is, if I need to adjust this path at all, I'm going to choose the sub-selection tool, and then I can select these points, and I can actually kind of adjust the handles for each one of those points along here. I had another video that I talked about this a little bit, where you can adjust these paths and kind of adjust the handles and get a little bit better motion out of your path, or kind of improve your path of action through adjusting the handles on the path. It's just like drawing a line in Adobe Animate, and you can adjust that line using these Bezier handles. Anyway, I'm going to go down here to the motion editor. I've already cleaned up this path quite a lot, but I'm going to kind of refine what's going on with this path. So if I watch the leaf and I need to kind of adjust the speed, one thing to realize is two little things sort of help you with your speed. First off, when you get to these points, these are the keyframes, and when I have points down below on the animation curve, I can adjust how quickly and how slowly it gets to that point by dragging the handles out. And realize that when these are flat, when this is horizontal, it's going really slow. When it pitches down like this, it's going pretty fast. If I click and drag one handle, they're going to be unified. So if you realize that if I kind of click and drag one of these, that the other handle moves with it, right? And I can kind of adjust these this way. If I want to break them, I just hold down the Option key and I can kind of drag one handle out. Generally, that's not the case unless it's sort of hitting something, or in some cases I want it to kind of come here really fast and stop and then come back the other way. But generally, for this kind of animation, I want these all to pretty much have sort of flattened handles. And I'm going to drag out a handle from this side, and I'm going to drag out, I'm just holding down Option while I'm dragging out the handle. And sometimes it does that where it wants to grab the playhead and not your handle, but you can kind of move it over a little bit. One thing to kind of realize that is when you're moving the cursor over one of the handles, you see there's a little box next to the pointer. When it's off, that box is not there. And then when I'm over one of the points along the path, there's a box, but it's filled in, right? So there's two little differences. So when you're hovering over this, you can kind of tell when you're sort of hovering over, it's a little bit, it's very precise. And I do wish that Adobe Animate made them a little bit bigger, but that's how it kind of works right now. Anyway, if I want to kind of adjust the way this curve comes in, I can drag a handle out. And generally on this leaf animation, I don't want any really super jarring motion, but I do want it to speed up and slow down at certain times. So I'm going to kind of check that. So now I get a little bit better speed. And if I want it to, like if it's coming to here too quickly, I can adjust this, or I can move it out a little bit. So I can, from here to here, it's going to go a little bit slower. So it takes a little bit more time to get to that point, right? And then if I want it to speed up, it's speeding up from here to here, and then it slows down. So if I want to adjust my timing at all, I can just I can select one of my keyframes and move it around if I need to adjust that timing. So let's look at from the start. Right, so I've got this first one that moves fairly quickly till it gets to here, and then it slows down, which is pretty good. Slows down about right there and then speeds up. So I'm going to come back to over here. It's getting to this point, and let's say I want that to go a little slower. I can drag this point out, and let's say I want to drag that point out a little bit. Right, so if I want it to go a little bit slower from here to here, I've just done that. I've added a little bit more frames in there, right? And then it gets to here and slows down, gets to there and slows down, right? It's probably going a little bit too fast for a leaf, for a fallen leaf, for a feather animation, but I'll talk about kind of adjusting the timing a little bit later. So sometimes these points sometimes I don't quite understand why Animate will do this, but it'll get rid of your handles sometimes, but I can just drag them back out and kind of add them in there. It just happens sometimes. I'll call it a bug, but it's one of those things that just sort of happens in Animate, right? And by the way, if I ever get to the point where I'm trying to select one of these, if you collapse this, you can kind of get back. It just means it's kind of locked it down a little bit, right? So there, I've kind of got the timing of my path working fairly well. I can adjust my timing a little bit more. One thing to remember is that, and do that again. One thing to remember about this is that the X is left to right and the Y is up and down. So I don't always have them slowing down at the same time like this. If you'll notice, when I adjust these points, if I move this X up and down, it's going to move it back and forth, right? So if I adjust these points too much, it's adjusting where my leaf or feather, whichever this animation is moving from left to right. If I want it to slow down from left to right, you'll also notice that when I slow these things down or speed them up, you'll notice that the path kind of changes as well. So once I get that kind of timed out pretty well, and let's say I get to here and I want it to see it's slowing down when it gets to this side, right? Now if I want it to speed up in between, let's say I want it to kind of speed up right in here. This is speeding up because the line is going a little more vertical. So if I want it to speed up a little bit more, I can pull these handles out a little bit more, and then it's going to kind of speed up in between and then slow down when it gets to the end. Right? And it kind of adjusts your speed when it gets to each point. And if I want, I can drag this handle out. If I really want it to kind of slow down right there at the end, I can drag that handle up a little bit, right? If it's getting to this point too fast, I can, again, drag that out a little bit more, right? And then it's basically adding frames in between here and here, right? So that's kind of adjusting my speed a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is what I would end up doing here is adding a little rotation. So I've already added some rotation in here. You'll see in the Z, I've already added a little bit of rotation here, and then it kind of comes down and does this. But let's say right in here, I want it to pitch down a little bit. And actually, let's look at it from this standpoint. This feather or this leaf is, to me, kind of pointing the wrong way. So what I could do is I could rotate that fully around, or I can just scale it. I can scale it opposite in these transforms, right? So I can just kind of get it to do that. Right? And I'm just doing it, I'm unlocking that transform, I'm scaling it the other way. That way it feels like it's kind of swinging in the right direction. And then I'm going to take it here and I'm going to rotate it down a little bit. So So it looks like it's kind of going along the path of action. And then when it does this, I want it to kind of go in that general direction. So it's going to do that, and it's going to swing the other way, right? And then let's say right in here, I want it to kind of flip around. And I'm just doing this, I just wanted to do this in a motion tween. Now, if I do this fully around, it's going to do this kind of flip, right? Which I probably don't want. Or maybe I do want it, and then I'm going to adjust how it's going to look in the shape tween. Right, so do that, it comes around, and then it comes down, and then I can adjust how these look when I do the shape tween. So I'm going to go to about right. I can line it up where I have other keyframes, but I don't necessarily need to. So I'm going to do that a little bit, and then kind of let it come around here. I like that kind of flip right there. I like that it's doing that, and I'm going to add some shape tweening to that. And then it's going to come to about right here, and I want it to do another little flip, right? And then come to here, and I'm going to have it come all the way around. I'm just adjusting how this travels as it kind of follows along this path, right? You probably want it to do this, and then do this, because I want it to follow along that way. And then I'm going to end it down here where it's doing that. And then I'm going to add some slow in, slow out to all those points, right? Now, this is not exactly what I probably would want at this point, but I'm kind of getting it to that point where I can start to kind of adjust it, right? I don't need it to be perfect at this point in time. I'm just kind of getting some rotation to get the idea of what I want it to look like. Right, and I'm just holding down Option, and I'm dragging the handles out. Right. Oop, there we go. Right, and one thing that I want to check is, there we go. Yeah, I just looking back at my path and seeing what I've done from this point so far. And then sometimes I just take that out of the way to kind of move these handles around. There we go. And if I hold down Option and drag back, it usually drags that handle backwards. But if you try to drag to the right, it wants to just drag it up and down. For some reason, it constrains it when you hold down Option that way. But it's not that big of a deal. You just have to kind of get the playhead out of your way. And then I'm going to add some slow in, slow out to this one because I want it to kind of slow down. And I've got it doing some pretty interesting things in terms of rotation, which I don't want it to do. So I am going to bring this down, right? And then probably like that. Yeah. And that's probably too much too. So I'm going to bring this one down, add a little bit too much rotation to it. There we go. And then this one can be, bring that up a little bit. There we go. There. All right. Now I'm sort of at the point where that probably did a huge loop-de-loop there. Yeah. I don't know. I'll play around with that, but I probably won't keep that just because I don't think it really should be doing that. There we go. And I can have it do that. So if I look at the whole animation now, I've got some rotation going on. It doesn't quite look exactly the way I want it yet, but it's getting there, right? So I just added some rotation just to get it to kind of move around. Now I can go through and add some shape tweening. And what I'm going to end up doing when you do this, I've got this leaf that I don't have any shape tweening on it yet. But I get to a point where I'm going to add some shape tweening. Let's say here I want it to modify a little bit. I want it to change up a little bit. So what I do is I select it. I actually added a little bit of, I already started doing some shape tweening, but I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to remove the shape tween, remove the shape tween, remove the shape tween. I'm actually going to remove frames, and let's just make this easier. And I'm hiding these. I added a stem earlier, but I'm going to just show how you can do it without that. Oh, didn't get that last one. I'm going to select across. There we go. Now I got all of them. And then I'm going to right click and remove shape tween. Right. Oh, and remove frames. And then drag across this whole thing. And I'm going to remove frames. So really what I want is I'm going to go back to my main scene, is when I do shape tweening for this, I need to look at how many frames my whole animation is, because my shape tweening needs to be that same length. So this right now is 240 frames. So when I select my leaf, and I'm going to go back here to where I wanted to do some shape tweening, right? And I double click it. Right now I've only got 20. So if I do any shape tweening here, it's going to stop about at frame 20. Right now it's showing me what frame it would be on, right? And if here it would stop at frame 20 and not do anything. Now, in order to go for the full length of the animation, I need to go to frame 240. And since I'm just doing this layer, I'm going to insert a frame there, right? And since I'd already made it a shape tween just by, right clicking and creating a shape tween, right? It would be there if there weren't a shape tween here already. And by the way, I had that locked, so I'm going to unlock it. And I had like the first position of that leaf, right? Now I've made my entire timeline of the shape of my symbol the same length as my final timeline. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can kind of see that. All right, so I have 240 frames for my entire animation. When I go to that frame where I'm going to add a little bit of shape tweening, I double click the leaf, which edits it in place. And now I'm on the frame along that shape tween that I need to add a keyframe. The cool thing about Animate 2020 is that they've updated how this button works. If you press and hold, you can actually tell it what that button is going to do, either a blank keyframe or a frame or a keyframe. By default, it's a keyframe, right? But you can change it to inserting a frame or inserting a blank keyframe or adding a keyframe. Since that's what I want to do, I don't want a blank one. I want an actual keyframe which duplicates the shape of this leaf on that frame, right? But gives it a keyframe. Then I can change my leaf, the shape of this leaf, to what I need it to be on this frame. Now, there's so many different ways you can modify the shape. One of my ways is to kind of select. So what's going to happen is it's going to morph it from frame 1 to this frame, however I move it. But I can kind of just select a point and move a point and kind of get it going that way. I can get it to modify the shape just a little bit. If I want to grab this point, I can kind of move it down a little bit just to get some variation in terms of how, what is changing on this leaf, or whatever object you're working on. So you can see it's kind of modifying it a little bit, right? But one really cool tool you can use to do this instead, like there's a whole bunch of different ways. You can even redraw. You can repaint your entire leaf or feather, or redraw a different shape, and it's going to morph it from this shape to this shape, right? Or shape tween it. There's this asset warp tool, and by the way, if it's not there, you have to select this and drag that morph tool onto your tool palette, right? And then close that, and then that tool will be available. But this asset warp tool works. It's kind of an interesting tool where it can warp your shape. Now, what I've just determined, or I figured out with doing this in shape tweening, is you have to go through a couple steps to make it work. But the idea here is that you're going to be kind of adding a pin to it. So the first time you click with it, it selects the shape with this asset warp. Then when you click again, it adds a point and it turns it into this kind of mesh. And the more times you press or you click down onto this mesh, it creates a new sort of warp point. And then what you can do is you can then click and drag those warp points to kind of modify the shape in between them. So I can kind of get a bit of a different shape going on. Now, my advice with this is don't go too far. If you're doing a shape tween and trying to get it to tween from shape to shape, if you go too far, it's just going to freak out. Now, you can't just leave it this way. That's kind of one of the downfalls of using this tool is it's just tweaking your shape. But if you notice, it disappears. It's doing that because now it's sort of a different shape. So what you're going to have to do after you've used that warp tool is you right click and you go to break apart. And when you do that, it takes whatever the warp tool changed and it takes it back and makes it a shape again. So now you can kind of see that it modified the shape from there to there, right? And that's kind of the idea. I go to this keyframe and it modified the shape. Now, if I go back out to my main scene and I play through, fit it to window, you're going to see that it modifies the shape as it gets to that point. Now I'm going to go to the next point where I want it to modify the shape. Let's say it's right in here. And I'm going to do something a little bit more extreme. Then I double click it and I'm at the point in my timeline, in the main timeline, where my shape tween would wind up, if that makes any sense. So wherever I double click this, whatever point in time I'm at, it's on frame 50. When I double click it, it's still on frame 50 in my symbol, right? And then this is where I'm adding my shape tweening. And again, I'm going to zoom into this. I just hit Command plus. And then if it does that, it means one easy way to kind of fix that is since I know that that's where I'm going to add a keyframe, I'm going to insert a keyframe. It selects whatever's in there. And if I hit plus or minus, it's going to zoom into whatever shape it is. And again, I'm going to go to the Asset Warp tool. And I'm going to select. And I figured out, like, for this shape, I don't really need that many points. I'm just going to add, 4 of them, because then once I've modified it, it then will, once I get rid of them, when I convert it back to a shape, I don't need the points won't be there anymore. So I'm going to kind of modify it so it does something a little bit more extreme, but not too far, because if I do that, this whole thing is just going to break, right? So I'm going to do that, and then again, I'm going to go to the select tool, right click, break apart. And if you don't like the shape and you want to go back, you can always re-add add new points on with the Asset Warp tool. It's just an intermediate step to get the shape that I want. And now I can kind of see what this is doing from this one to this one. I'm going to go back to my main scene, go back to fitted in window, and now I'm going to play forward. And you're going to see what happens when it gets to this point. See, it's already changed its shape throughout. And I'm going to get to about right here, and I'm going to add it again. It's doing kind of a neat little thing right here where it curls. And actually what I'm going to do is I want to kind of keep it till about right there. I kind of like that shape, but I'm going to make it I'm going to make it morph it a little bit more. I want it to kind of curve a little bit more, or maybe change the top of it a little bit, just as it's starting to kind of change that shape. And the idea here is that when you're talking about an animation such as this, is that once it kind of gets to the end, it's kind of slowing down, and then it's speeding up in between and slowing down, and then speeding up and slowing down and speeding up, slowing down and speeding up. So in between, it's usually going faster. There's some times when it's a little bit different, but that's kind of the concept. And so the feather would be pushed against the wind, and the wind would kind of contort it. So that's why I'm kind of making the shape a little bit curved when it comes to the ends, and then I'm going to elongate it when it comes in the middle. So that's kind of the concept of this whole type of animation, is it's sort of curling because the wind is pushing it, or it's hitting some wind resistance and it's deforming the shape as it's getting around the corners or at either end, and then it's pushing, the wind is pushing it back the other way. That's the idea. So in this frame, I'm going to do it again. I double click, I insert a frame right there, insert a keyframe. I'm going to hold on Command. For me, it's Command. If you're on Windows, it's Control. And then go to the Asset Warp tool. And again, I'm going to select it. Sometimes you have to select it once and then you add points along its path. Whoop. There we go. And then there, there, and there. And I'm just going to take this, I'm going to kind of twist it this way just a little bit more. I want it to kind of get a little bit more of the shape going to it. So again, go back to the selection tool, right click, break apart. It turns it back into a shape. And now I've got this going. Go back to my main timeline. I know it's kind of going back and forth, but at least when you get to that point where it's on your main timeline where you want it to kind of be modified, that's when you edit it. You double click to edit it in place, enter a keyframe. I'm going to get closer to it again. Whoop. Let me select that keyframe because then that'll let me, it'll zoom right to it. I'm going to choose the Asset Warp tool, select it, click make a couple points to it. And let's say I want to add another one. And then I'm going to get this to elongate a little bit, right? And the cool thing is it's sort of taking whatever drawing you have and it's changing its shape to match whatever is in this. One thing to kind of realize is that you need to kind of obey where the pivot point is on this, because the animation along the motion tween is it's following a pivot point. So if you're getting too far off the pivot point, you might have to move the whole shape back to where it needs to be. And I'll kind of illustrate that. Break it apart. Go back here. See where that pivot point is? Now I can go back, since it's kind of off the path. If I double click this and I just move it down a little bit, I go back, I'm lining it up with its pivot point, and then it's still gonna obey that pivot point. So I'm gonna go back here. Oh. Fit in window. There we go. And I get it to curl a little bit, and then it's going to straighten out, right? And I can get it to come down here, and I can almost reverse its shape because it's straightened out. I'm going to get to about right here. I don't have to be lined up with the same keyframes as my motion tween. So let's say right there I wanted to kind of start changing its shape a little bit, right? So I can double click, again, insert a keyframe, and select that, make sure it's selected, get a little bit closer, Asset Warp tool. And again, I'm not making too many drastic changes because it will just, the shape tweening will just kind of make it deform in very odd ways. I am just changing it a little bit each time, right? And I can kind of get interesting shapes going on because of that, right? So try that. And if I scrub back and forth, whoop, I didn't select that, but I need to go back and break apart. And then there you can kind of see it's doing something a little weird, but it might work out in terms of the animation. You just don't want it to go too far and completely break your shape tween, right? There we go. So that's probably not getting exactly what I want. It looks like it's getting kind of weird in here. So I can go back in. I can go in between these, or I can fix it with going to Modify, Shape. Sorry, select that. I need to be on the keyframe. If you go to Modify, Shape, and you can add a shape hint. Usually you have to be on the first keyframe out of 2 to add the shape hint. But I can go Shape, add shape hint. What that's going to do, I'm going to zoom into this, is it adds a little point that I need to line up for it. Let's say I put it down here. I go to the second point, and I need to put that right where the first point was. So what it's doing is it's kind of tracking that point. that might be enough to kind of keep it together, and it looks like it kind of did. Yeah, so it doesn't break too much, right? If this shape is going too bizarre, you don't have to, you might not want it to go that much. You can go back and you can modify. You can use this tool again, and I could just modify one little point of it. Maybe I don't want it to curl up that much, or I want it to be down here or something, right? I don't have to go too far, right? And then go back, right click, break apart, and then I'll look at what's going on with the animation. And maybe that's what I want. So I'm going to go back to my main scene, go back out to fit into window, and then I'm going to go ahead and play that through. Right? Now, I haven't added more, but that's kind of the idea for the whole thing, is that you're going to each point where you want the leaf or feather or this whatever object you're shape tweening along a motion tween, is you get to the point where you want it to be modified and you start to add a little bit of shape tweening in between. You don't need to go too far, mainly because the idea is that you're just getting a little bit of change going for each stage of that motion tween. That should be enough to get you going. That is adding shape tweening to a motion tween. In this example, it was for a feather or a leaf falling to the ground, which is a pretty traditional animation assignment. And hopefully that'll be enough to help you out along to kind of modify your animation that's along a motion tween.